Hello, welcome to our reading processes presentation for the spring semester 2018. Normally I do this in class, but because our time is slightly limited from 8 o'clock in the morning till 10:30, sometimes doesn't offer us as much time as we would like. So I'm doing some of these online this semester. The reading processes one should be your first one. What we're going to do through this is just a couple of activities to kind of get you thinking about the reading processes as Tompkins lists in the textbook, chapter 2, and to also get you thinking about the theory of reading. I don't teach theory at all. I'm more of an application person, so I'm not necessarily concerned with the why we read or why there are reading processes, but more about how we use our reading processes, because I believe that informs your teaching more than just thinking about why we read. You read an article last week about what is reading, so you have a definition of what is reading. Now we're just going to talk about what we do when we're reading. This is my nephew Jeffrey when he was about 2. He's 5 now and in kindergarten, and I still can't believe it myself. But in this picture, Jeffrey has a book in his hand. Of course, he's sitting in the back of the car. He's 2 in this picture and already holding and enjoying books. So this is just something that I like to share because I think he's gorgeous and brilliant, and he's already a reader. And then, of course, this was his first day of school last year, not this year that he's currently in. This was when he was in pre-K, and he was just so excited to be there. The picture on the left is just his interpretation of how to spell his name. It's Jeff. We call him Jeff. But I just thought that was really cute. And the picture, look at him. He's just adorable in his Happy Camper Snoopy t-shirt. When you're reading the Tompkins chapter this week and looking to complete your homework, you know that you're going to be working on the 5 stages of reading. Again, this is part of the how we read, not necessarily of the why we read. I'm just going to quickly go over the 5 stages because you're going to read about it in depth in the textbook, but I wanted to definitely introduce it here before we get into the activities that you will complete. Of course, the first stage of reading is to just pre-read. And one of the things that we do when we pre-read is we review what we're looking at. We look at captions, we look at pictures, we look at graphs and charts. Generally, we're not going to just pick up something to read just because. Students, especially who struggle with reading or who claim they don't like to read, need a purpose for reading. So if they know why they're reading something, then they're more apt to follow directions and actually do it. So when we're pre-reading, we're setting that purpose. We want our students to think about the topic of what they're reading before they get into it and kind of get the brain working and accessing that prior knowledge. And we also like for the students to predict what the story might be about. And that really just sets up a student before even getting into the material. They set up an interest in it by thinking about it ahead of time and therefore continue through the process of reading when they've predicted or they've thought about or they looked ahead or they've looked at pictures before they even start reading the first word. Second process is reading. This is where that article you read last week, What is Reading, kind of comes into play. You know that it's an active process. When you're reading, you're not just looking at words on a page. You're making sense of those words. You're taking notes and asking questions of what the author has written. You are using other skills and strategies that you have been taught or just use whenever you read to help you get through what you're reading. And in reading also, there is a form of predicting where you're reading maybe a paragraph and something interesting is happening, so you're thinking about or predicting what might come next. This activity when reading helps the students stay involved in reading. So you need to teach them these processes and the skills and strategies within these processes to be able to enjoy reading and get something out of it. Third is responding. We want students always, always, always reflecting on what they're reading, because when you are using metacognition, which is thinking about thinking, or having knowledge about knowledge, when you have students thinking about thinking or using their metacognition skills, they are going deeper into what they're doing. So when you're responding, you're using a form of metacognition where the students are going to read something, but then you want them to write a reflection or write a summary or talk with their teammates about what they read or ask questions about what they read. Another way to respond is just to simply log reading into a reading log. Unless the reading log is an active reading log, studies show that reading logs aren't necessarily as effective as other means of responding. If you're just asking students to read and respond by putting the name of a book and how many minutes they read that night, they're not getting much out of it. All they're doing is logging how many minutes they're reading. So if you think about and intend to use reading logs in your class, think about using some kind of interactive reading log where the students have to use metacognition skills or think about the reading once they finished. The fourth stage of reading is exploring. Every time you have students read, you want them making some kind of connection as to what they're reading. That's either text to text, text to self, or text to the world. In fact, for your read aloud, the TEK that you're going to use for the read aloud is the Making Connections TEK, and you're going to want to find a book that teaches a lesson, which will essentially be text to world, because you want the students connecting to some greater cause, and we'll talk more about that later. But when exploring, you want the students to have made some kind of connection to the story. When you do that, you're creating a situation of better comprehension, because the students are going to better understand the story when they have made a connection. Of course, in exploring also, simply rereading something or going back into the material and rereading parts of it helps comprehension, especially when a student struggled with maybe some vocabulary or a difficult concept. So exploring a text or exploring reading helps students deeper comprehend. It also helps with creating a new vocabulary or new verbiage. When you are reading something and you skip over vocabulary words that maybe you don't know, it may prompt you to look up a word, and it builds new vocabulary by exploring new situations in text. And lastly, the fifth stage is applying what you've read, or applying knowledge about what you've read. You're just doing something with the reading, whether it's a project or a skit, or having students talk to each other about what they've read, having students create new stories based on what they've read, and so on. Application is definitely, to me, one of the most important, because it shows in real things, in some realia, what the students understood or what they comprehended about what they've read. I handed you on Monday a couple of different things, and the first one I'd like for you to access is the comprehension and code packet. The comprehension and code packet is it's based on a story that might seem familiar to you. On the front page, you'll see the words "Once Upon a Time" and a black and white image of a pig, what looks like a house with a nice window and a plant on a windowsill. Take that out and have a look at the packet before you get started. The idea of this activity is to put you in the mind frame of a student who doesn't yet efficiently know how to read. Maybe this student only knows about 8 to 10 letters. And if they only know 8 to 10 letters, there's quite a few words you could put together with just 8 or 10 letters, but there's not a large vocabulary there. This activity asks you to decipher a code as if you were a child who didn't have a very deep vocabulary or even a knowledge of many words at all. So what I want you to do is use the sentence or the part of the sentence, once upon a time, to identify the code, and then complete the comprehension and code packet to complete the story by using whatever processes and skills you use to read. You can use anything at your disposal, although I don't know how much else is going to help you except each other. So if you have questions, depend on your teammates or your friends, but use whatever you need to be able to complete this story using the code that's been given to you. I do suggest going ahead and doing that now. So you may pause the presentation here so that you can go ahead and get through that. Once you're done, just unpause and continue in the presentation. So you've completed your comprehension and code packet. You've got a story there. Again, it might sound a little familiar to you. What I want you to do is reflect on what you were thinking and what you were doing as you were figuring this out. How did you figure it out? So I'd like for you to list on the back side of your comprehension code packet 3 to 5 processes that you used while you were decoding this story. Maybe you used the picture. Maybe you used a chart where you wrote out a symbol and then the letter that matches that symbol. Maybe you used prior knowledge of the story that might be familiar to you. Maybe you used context clues and things that were going on in the story that you were able to just automatically input new words or put letters together to make new words. And then once you've completed your list of the processes you used, I want you to write about the processes you use whenever you read for fun and whenever you read for school or work. That'll get you thinking about how you do it. And then I want you to think about, you don't have to write about, but I want you to think about how your students are using processes. And this will start looking more obvious to you once you get into your mentors class at Bowie and you see students reading. But I want you thinking about these processes and understanding that a kindergartner who doesn't yet know his alphabet may be struggling with something you ask him to read, even if it's just 2-letter words, even if it's just 3-letter words. So I want you thinking about how everybody goes through these processes when they are reading. And once you've finished your list of 3 to 5 processes and have written about what you do when you read for fun or for school, I'd like for you to access Dire Straits. Have the Dire Straits, a couple of paragraphs out and ready for you. Chapter 1 in the effective teachers, what effective teachers do. The principle 2 was about the cueing systems. We talk a bit more about this when we get into running records, but the cueing systems are essential when thinking about the reading processes. There are these things that happen in our brains when we're reading, especially when we're experienced readers, because we're active in the reading process. So when you are active in a reading process, your cueing systems inside your own brain are going off. And there are 4 cueing systems. You guys wrote about this week, last week for your homework. So you should be somewhat familiar with these cueing systems, at least in part. The first is phonological awareness. Phono means sound. So anytime you see that, you know that we're talking about the sounds of things. When we're talking about the cueing systems within reading processes, these are phonemes, which are the smallest unit of a word that actually has a sound. You can consider those and graphemes letters. Phonics is the sound of words or the sounds of letters. Phonological awareness is the sounds of letters put together and how the long A sounds one way and the short A sounds another way. Syntactic or syntax is the structure of what we're reading. This is specifically how a sentence is laid out and whether or not it's grammatically correct. If you're reading something and you come across some out of place adjectives before the nouns or after the nouns or however it might be written in your brain as you're reading, you're thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right. There may be some problem with the syntax cue. So syntax has to do with the structure of a sentence or the grammar in a sentence. The semantics are the meanings of words. So if you're reading something and you come across a word that you think you understand what it means, but as you're reading, you recognize that maybe it doesn't make sense anymore, you're using your semantic cue. Semantics has to do with the vocabulary, and one of the best ways to improve the semantic cue is to learn more vocabulary, practice more words, know more definitions, know synonyms and antonyms and all those things. Lastly, the pragmatic cue is the function of words that we're reading. Because we are English speakers, the pragmatic cue would have to do with English. If we were reading something in Spanish, our pragmatic cue would be going off because maybe we don't understand Spanish because it's not our standard English or it's not what we've been taught. So maybe you're seeing in some reading that kids, specifically in schools, are switching between their home language. In Texas, a lot of that is Spanish and English. You'll realize that the students don't have a pragmatic use of the English language yet, so their standard English is thrown off. Their cues when they're reading, unless they're reading in the language they're most comfortable in, would not help them comprehend. And that, I want to make sure to state, is the most important reason for understanding these cues and understanding the processes. If the students are having these miscues where the phonological sounds aren't coming together for them and they're not, the students are reading and the sounds aren't there, or the syntax is off and they're not understanding that, they don't have a strong vocabulary base, so the semantics are off. What's happening is they're not getting it. And if a student's asked to read something and they're not getting it, it's an ultimate waste of time. It's a frustrating activity for students and they're just going to shut down. So what we have to do is recognize that these are the things that are happening when students are reading, and what we want is for students to understand. We want them for these cues going off all the time, but we want them questioning and being in the reading process so that they are better able to comprehend what they're reading. When they understand why they're reading it and what they're reading, they're going to enjoy reading so much more. To give you an example of how your cueing systems are going off, pick up your copy of Dire Straits and read it out loud to yourself. Read it out loud. You can read it to a partner or a neighbor or somebody if you want, but I want you to read it out loud to yourself. Once you've read it, read it again. Just one more time. Read it again out loud to yourself. And then I want you to take this pop quiz. I want you to write your answers to the questions on this page on your Dire Straits worksheet. And then I ask that you summarize what you've read in no more than 2 sentences. It's pretty short, so it shouldn't take more than 2 sentences anyway, but summarize what this is about on your Dire Straits worksheet. The first question I want you to answer is, who was in dire straits? I want you to answer, what had the opening pair been doing? How did Inverarity pull Brown into the gully? Where was Jones? And when did the route end? If you're able to answer all of those, congratulations, you made 100 on the pop quiz. Your summary, though, is going to tell me how much you understand of this paragraph. That's it for this presentation. Good luck on your comprehension code and the Dire Straits summary, and I very much look forward to seeing what you come up with.